Hello and welcome to the Fantasy Life Show. Happy Monday, everybody. I'm your host, Ian Hartitz. It is a great day to be great. It's a great day to break down all of the action from an eventful NFL wildcard weekend. And joining me to do just that, the one, the only Fantasy Life Director of Analytics, Dwain, the Rock McFarland. Dwain, you were on record saying this is your favorite football weekend of the year. Maybe it wasn't a super wildcard weekend, if you might say, but still pretty good.
Super in the fact that we had football every single day. We still have another football game to go tonight. They are playoff teams, but yeah, we did have some lopsided games, but we'll still take it, Hartitz, and we've got all these playoff contests going. And you know what? The cool part is, like, if you didn't do well, like, we've got round 2 of Guillotine going. So what? The teams you thought would advance in the first round or the underdogs you picked, maybe it was the Packers and you wanted a unique build, didn't work out. Fine, you can start over, Ian. That's the beautiful part about it.
It's like now, man, having the whole, just ability to, bet with DraftKings and whoever, it is great. I love it, just again, day after day. But I kind of miss the days, Dwayne, where it was like you had to kind of hit your bookie up on Monday, where it was like a clean slate each and every week. Like, oh, how much did I lose last week? Who cares? Brand new slate, brand new chance for me to get going. So as Dwayne mentioned, not done just yet. We do have the Rams and Vikings kicking off Monday night. So get your popcorn ready for that one. But with that said, still have 5 different games that we want to break down, add some utilization context too, and yeah, just mainly talk ball about. So appreciate you guys joining us as always. And with that, let's get into it. All right, Dwayne, we are meshing our, game-by-game recaps with our utilization report presented by DraftKings, of course, kicking things off with the Texans taking down the Chargers 32-12. Houston obviously covered as 2.5-point dogs with the win outright. And the only over of the slate to cash so far, did indeed get there at 41.5. So should have known when I was so confident that the Chargers could make some noise in the playoffs that something like this would go ahead and happen. So hand up, I dropped the ball on that one. Got to give some credit, though, to these Houston Texans, though. Dwain really was a group that hadn't looked lethal for the better part of the entire season, and especially as of late. That said, though, C.J. Stroud, Joe Mixon, and Nico Collins did more than enough to ultimately get the job done and get that W.
Yeah, and for Stroud, man, it was a good game for him, Ian. If we look at it, going back to week 8 was the last time we saw him throw for at least 275 yards. So definitely one of the better games we've seen from Stroud in some time. Only been over 275 4 times this year. So nice to see things getting going. And you do wonder sometimes when we get into these playoffs, sometimes I feel like the offenses actually just simplify things a little bit. Like, it's okay, we're going to go out and we're going to get the ball to Nico Collins. Probably feels like a good idea. If you had him in a Guillotine League or you put him on one of your playoff rosters, really nice for you, because a lot of teams, to your point, Ian, did lean to the Chargers. And Nico, man, a differentiator, came through with 25.2 fantasy points. You're going to get another game out of him next week against the Chiefs. He had an 8.5 utilization score. Remember, guys, utilization score is a 0 to 10, so 8.5 would be like getting an 85 on a 0 to 100. 25% target share. So Nico doing his thing, and then really just feeding Joe Mixon. Now, Joe Mixon's been getting fed. He's been dealing with the injury and some really tough matchups, but we saw him get right in this one, Ian. He had 18.9 PPR points, 8.4 utilization score. So I saw Michael Leone from over at Establish the Run. He was tweeting this weekend saying, basically just trying to, forgive himself for taking shares of Joe Mixon. And it was early in the game. And I'm like thinking, by the end of the game, like, it looks really good. It's a contrarian play. People weren't on the Texans. Thought that you're probably a little overconfident in what the Chargers would be able to do. And sure enough, it's Mixon, Nico Collins, C.J. Stroud, all looking really good right now for the Texans.
Mixon with 106 yards on the ground and a touchdown. His first game with even 60 rushing yards or finding the end zone, Dwayne, since week 13. So again, by and large, was a great year for Mixon. I remember us sitting here around week 12, week 13, especially with some of those buys, literally ranking him as the overall RB1. Certainly didn't help many in the fantasy playoffs. But again, new year, new Joe Mixon, at least for so far. And then we have Nico Collins, man. And just overall on this season, I know personally I have my first round mock ahead of this season go out. I had Nico sitting there as the 112 selection there at the end of round 1. Seen a similar sentiment out there. And some people have, been quick to scoff at that a little bit. But man, despite that injury, first in yards per route run, 7th in targets per route run. Again, Dwayne, 2 of the better stats we have for evaluating wide receivers, just by verdict of it being our largest sample size being routes. And of course, we want those yards and targets. So the fact you see him all the way up there in the top right, he's right there with A.J. Brown. Puka Nacua is the only guy definitively better. I mean, you truly do not need more than 2 hands to count the number of wide receivers you'd rather have than Nico, both in real life and fantasy.
Yeah, people were scoffing that you were too low on Nico or too high.
I think too high, man. People wanted BTJ and Malik Neighbors in them, which I get.
Well, and I get it. I get it too. But Nico is playing just as well as those guys. And honestly, like, I mean, look, I get it. I like those two guys as well. I think there's less questions right now with Nico Collins heading into next year. The biggest question still being like, what is CJ Stroud? Was he the year 1 CJ Stroud? Was he the year 2 CJ Stroud? Truth probably somewhere lying in the middle. It would be nice, though, to see the Texans keep this passing attack going at least into next weekend. We'll see what they can do against the Chiefs if they get past them. You know, if Stroud could put some of our concerns to rest, because he really had a tough second half of the season, I think that would make us feel even more confident. But I'm with you. I don't see a way that Nico Collins isn't in round 1. Really like those other wide receivers as well, but Nico's an absolute beast, man.
Speaking of, Stroud chipped in 42 rushing yards, even have one long run that gave me, some PTSD flashbacks to his big one against Georgia a couple years ago. Luckily, the Texans kicker was far more ready to hit the ensuing field goal than the Buckeyes were at that point. So otherwise, John Mechie, had 8 targets, did lose an opening fumble on the Texans' first offensive play of the game. So that wasn't ideal. Didn't see much from Dalton Schultz, Xavier Hutchinson, or Deontay Johnson. Still just 16 total snaps for Deontay. So clearly still working him into things, Dwayne. Again, going to be seeing the Texans take on the Kansas City Chiefs next Saturday in the first game of the divisional round. Get your popcorn ready for that one. So again, great stuff by the Texans. I'm sure we'll have plenty more things to say about them this week. But now getting into, again, I guess more of an exit interview for the Los Angeles Chargers. We just see Justin Herbert go out there and throw not 1, not 2, not 3, but 4 interceptions. So I'm not going to make this a Herbert apologist episode. We've obviously been very high on the guy, and I still do think he's a top 5 to 6 real life quarterback. This was not a good game, though. 2 of the interceptions, especially Dwayne, I think you can give him some slack. A bit of a high pass went through Ladd McConkey's hands, and then definitely the interception that literally just hit Will Dissly in the chest. Can't be overly critical to Herbert about that one. But, man, you go 14 for 32. Not great. Albeit it was against the Texans defense that we've seen, really handle guys like Josh Allen, throughout this year, amongst others, where these sort of, just again, really bad stat lines have been there. So again, sucks to see it happen for Herbert, at the playoffs and the season on the line, but this isn't really going to be having any major implications, I would say, Dwayne, to how I treat Herbert. I guess consider him, in the standing of passers ahead of 2025.
I totally agree with you. If I was starting a team tomorrow and I was running an NFL franchise, I would start with Herbert over Stroud right now. I mean, Stroud ends up winning that game. Yes, Herbert makes some bad plays, but to your point, had some unlucky breaks. And look, it's just this is a game of massive volatility, period, especially in just one game. We have massive volatility at a season level in football. So when you start talking about a one-game outcome, when I look at Herbert, still the guy that can make all the throws, Ian. Now, if he choked again next year, you'd start to wonder, hey, is this a situation where maybe it's a mental thing once you get into the playoffs? But I'm not at that point with Herbert. Can make all the throws, seems like a great leader, super tough, plays through injuries. Look, and I think how many quarterbacks will be doing what he's doing with just Ladd McConkey? Because, I mean, let's be honest, Quentin Johnson, he can make some big plays, but a very inconsistent player. They don't really have a high-level tight end. He's turned Will Dissly into something at least decent for fantasy football purposes. So it's really Ladd McConkey or bust, and we've had a pretty good season from Justin Herbert. So I would just like to see, as far as the exit interview part, let's get another weapon in here for this guy. Let's get someone else that he can count on to go with Ladd McConkey. I know you and I were talking a little bit pregame. T. Higgins, man. T. Higgins in the powder blue with the yellow bolts on the head, man. I would be down for that.
Chargers are going to have the 23rd pick, and some of this could change, obviously, but as I'm saying it right now, 23rd pick, 56th pick, and 87th pick here in the upcoming draft. So I agree, T. Higgins would be fantastic, especially, Dwayne, just because we've seen Herbert thrive with, similar contested catch artists like Mike Williams over the years, who, again, I do think is a pretty similar archetype from what we see from T. Higgins out there. So, again, great stuff. No, I should say not great stuff by Justin Herbert, but I do think there still could be more great stuff ahead. 52.8% 40% pressure rate allowed, by the way, in that game, guys. Second highest mark against Herbert this season. So again, not ideal, but was ideal for Ladd McConkey with those 187 yards and a touchdown on 14 targets, included an 86-yard catch and run touchdown where he made a sweet catch and then just kind of ran away from everyone. We were joking before the show, Dwain, how Ladd really does look like a teenager running around out there, but my goodness, looks like one of the best teenagers alive with the way he continues to, again, go through NFL defenses of all shapes and sizes out there. So with Ladd, I mean, looking ahead to next year, adding someone like T. Higgins would certainly, complicate things from a target ceiling perspective. But man, Dwain, with Ladd, he played like a wide receiver one down the stretch of 2024, and looking ahead to 2025, going to be awfully difficult to keep him out of that top 15.
Yeah, 34.7 PPR points this past weekend with a 9.4 utilization score, again, with the best you can get being a 10. So Ladd was absolutely on fire, and he's really been doing this for the last month, Ian. I mean, closing out so strong, 23.3 PPR points per game with a 9.0 utilization score. Guys that have had a 9.0 utilization score as wide receivers over the last 4 seasons, those are wide receiver ones. They are all wide receiver ones. So it will be very interesting to see what happens. Do they bring in someone like A.T. Higgins? Even if they do, Ian, I really like Justin Herbert, and I think, he can survive with one other really good target earner. If you suddenly get to 3 and that becomes an issue, I think I would get a little bit more concerned. But man, just the chemistry the two have shown together, and he's honestly taken over a lot of the routes that Keenan Allen left behind. Now, he doesn't always have to work from the slot. Ladd also plays on the outside. Didn't leave the field all game in this playoff game. A 100% snap rate for Ladd McConkey in this final game. So he has shown that he can play all over the field. So that's a great thing for him. That was our biggest concern coming in, was would the Chargers put him on the field whenever they were just in their two wide receiver sets. They've done that, and he's proven he's capable of handling that workload. So even if we had another really good wide receiver, I think we're still going to feel good about Ladd McConkey next year. Now, if they don't, I think then it becomes the question of, is this guy a wide receiver 1? Because if they add T. Higgins, we're going to have him in the wide receiver 2 conversation. But if they don't add someone in, I think that's really where it gets interesting. How high would you be willing to go on Ladd McConkey? Does he enter that same conversation as Brian Thomas Jr. and Malik Neighbors? Because that's where he's been for the last month.
And that's where you really see him ranking, again, with some of these yards per route run, targets per route run, advanced metrics. He has been literally just as good as those guys. Again, maybe not getting the same level of hype. He's had Justin Herbert there, who we can at least all agree has been an upgrade over the Jacksonville and Giants QBs. But yeah, man, again, going to be one of the bigger offseason storylines to watch. Same thing with this backfield. Obviously, Dobbins and Gus Bus, were able to have their moments this year, particularly Dobbins, but far from guaranteed to have these future roles again in 2025. So whether it's Ashton Genty, Caleb Johnson, maybe one of the free agent running backs, certainly a lot to find out there if we're going to, again, get more of a featured role for maybe Dobbins again, or if it'll be a new guy leading that Harbaugh offense. So disappointing season, Chargers. I get it. You guys were hoping to make a run here, and I thought they were about to. But if you could have gone back all the way to week 1 and kind of outlined how many good things did happen, I do think you would have been, again, more happy than not with the results. So plenty more on the way, though, guys. But first, a quick word to our friends over at DraftKings. Hey, football fans, there's only a few short weeks left in the season, and we've got some exciting wild games to look forward to now. Get in on the action right now with my partners at DraftKings Sportsbook. They are offering all new customers $200 in bonus bets instantly after betting just $5. Don't let this slip away. Download the DraftKings app now and sign up using code FANTASYLIFE. The crown is yours. All right, guys, moving on to the Saturday night kickoff. We did have the Ravens take down the Steelers 28-14, covering with ease as 9.5-point faves. The under cashed here at 44.5. So really, Dwain, this one wasn't even that close. It was 21-0 Ravens at halftime. And unfortunately, yet another quick wild card loss for the Mike Tomlin-led Pittsburgh Steelers. But we'll start off with the winners, and that did include Lamar Jackson, man, really putting forward his best playoff performance to date. Best all-time marks for him in 6 games now in completion rate, passer rating, yards per attempt, EPA per dropback was his best as well. So again, we saw this all season. I believe Lamar Jackson will win his 3rd MVP award here shortly. And again, his passing production particularly just been on another level. So wasn't all that surprising, again, Dwain, relative to what we saw in this regular season, but good to see Lamar and company continue to keep on keeping on into the playoffs.
Yeah, I mean, Lamar looked great. Just watching him, the game looks like it's just, so slow for him. It looked like things were going to be covered up. Play wasn't going to work out. He buys time. Justice Hill pops out of the backfield, gets it to him for a touchdown. He's an absolute nightmare to deal with as a defense. And this is a game, where you didn't have your best wide receiver in Zay Flowers, so the Ravens were struggling to find someone else to step up, but it did not matter to Lamar Jackson because he is such a mess to deal with, whether it's on the ground or, him finding a target late after scrambling around like we saw with Justice Hill.
And you could also see the impact that Lamar has on that Ravens run game. Long, just run up the middle by Derrick Henry, and you could see the three different Steelers defenders with their eyes outside because, again, Lamar obviously always a threat to take off in the read option game. I know that was something we talked about a lot in this offseason was Henry going from a Titans offense that just bottom of the barrel in terms of their yards before contact or carry. And this Ravens offensive line, man, say about their coach, their scheme, whatever, but they were replacing, I believe it was 3 starters going into this year. Lamar has been that constant that has continued to help that run game, again, just be one of the best in the NFL. So Dobbins and Gus were always averaging, 5+ yards per carry here. Not that they suck or anything, but again, Lamar really is the straw that's been stirring that ever-potent Ravens rushing attack drink. So with Derrick Henry, 186 yards and 2 touchdowns, just throwing right hooks out there for stiff arms, Dwain. I mean, I cannot imagine trying to tackle this dude in freezing temperatures, and he's also pretty fast too. Fun stats from our friends over at NFL Plus. This season, Henry's top speed, 21.7 miles per hour, 3rd highest mark of his career, and his average speed when hitting the line of scrimmage at 10.45 miles per hour. That's his 2nd highest mark of his career as well. So with all this in mind, Dwain, Henry signed that 2-year contract with the Ravens. He's going to do more great things, we're assuming, here in the rest of the playoffs. Why should anyone be fading this alien ahead of 2025? Because my goodness, it seemingly hasn't worked once here over the past 5 years.
Yeah, and I really love that latest stat, the miles per hour at the line of scrimmage. Like, I think that's actually probably something that is very meaningful because, like, we actually understand what momentum means. Not momentum of the game swinging back and forth, but like a player of his size being at that speed. And that comes back to scheme. It comes back to the player. But getting him looks where it can be a clean, vertical, attack to the line of scrimmage, not trying to stay sideways. So they use a lot of pulling guards, different things like that, where it's like, hey, a quick little toss to him and he is putting one foot in the ground, taking off downhill, man. Even if you're a 320-pound defensive lineman, you really don't want to be taking on Derrick Henry already moving at near full speed because, like, it's just, it's a losing battle. It's a losing battle for DBs, for linebackers, even for defensive linemen that are standing there flat-footed. And, man, as the games go on, you do see it. It just wears teams down and people just start making the business decisions. And it's a real thing. Like, if you go back and you just watch the history of Derrick Henry playing late in the season, it is a real thing. I know some of these things are narrative, but it is happening with him. Obviously, a huge game, 30.6 PPR points in this one, a 6.8 utilization score. The only reason that's a little bit low is because we did have Justice Hill return to the lineup. He did take most of the passing down work. He led the team in route participation, but it doesn't really matter. Ian, he's averaging 26.5 fantasy points per game over the last month of the season. I know we had a little lull after weeks, 3 to 6. He averaged 27 fantasy points per game. Looked like he might be the MVP of the fantasy season as a round 3 or round 2 pick in your fantasy draft. Fell off a little bit, but really has returned to form here late. And again, teams just really don't want to deal with tackling this man, especially late in the ball game.
He's going to be seeing, again, seemingly rest of this year and the next year, 20-plus carries per game out there. And we're not getting the receiving work, and that's fine. But, again, I'm just trying to kind of paint a scenario other than him getting injured where he could possibly bust in 2025, Dwain. All right? And I'm knocking on wood. Please, injury gods, don't do anything crazy like that. I'm just saying, it's a Ravens offense with Lamar. We can't always be, 100% certain about the league's best scoring offenses. But if we had to pick 5, I'm sure the Ravens would be there. I mean, right now, Dwain, I'm going to have Derrick Henry ranked ahead of guys like Devon Achane and Chase Brown in the way too early, 2025 ranks, because I can't figure out for the life of me, Henry and guys like Saquon, how they bust next season.
Yeah, and I think, if you're zooming out, like, that's really the bigger picture is, we've really been over the last 4 to 5 years on this train of let's fade these earlier running backs, even these late career running backs, even if you've got to do it a season early, because the risk just really wasn't worth it. But when you talk about players like Saquon Barkley as well as Derrick Henry that truly are differentiators, then I think you got to think about it a little bit differently. And I think that's what this year proves to us. Like, if you've got more of a plotter kind of guy, Ian, this late in their career, I think you're probably still better off fading them if they're going to have an early ADP. So a better example would be a late career Josh Jacobs. Like, are you really going to want to get on board with if a guy like that ended up being a late round 1 pick or early round 2 pick? I think you would still be right to fade that because he's more replaceable. But when you have someone like Derrick Henry, like Saquon Barkley, and even though they're in their career twilight, it's just a different story for some of these guys that are true freaks of nature. So I don't think we can take it and say apply it to everyone, but I think you're on the right track, especially with a guy like Henry getting to play with Lamar Jackson, which you already mentioned, which has been a game changer. And honestly, anything he may have lost, like what he's picking up from this scheme and the quality of the offense, like it's offsetting all of that.
We'll see what kind of other offseason moves happen. If the, obviously Eagles and Ravens decide to use top 100 picks on running backs, maybe that could change things a little bit. But as things stand right now, really don't see against Saquon or King Henry being moved off. Again, that perch, that led to them, winning a lot of people some money in Fantasyland this year. So otherwise, Dwain mentioned the short touchdown to Justice Hill. Rashad Bateman had another one. That's now 10 on the season, which is awesome. And we saw both Ravens tight ends getting on the action. 77% route rate for Mark Andrews and 73% for Isaiah Likely. Certainly seemed like that was more so their solution, again, without Zay Flowers in the picture. So got to see a little bit of Anthony Miller out there. Gave him a shout out a couple weeks ago. Blast from the past. Drafted him way too much on some of those Bears teams. Never wrong, just early though, Dwain. And yeah, accordingly, we will again get to see the Ravens take on the Bills next week. Cannot wait for that one. Before we move on to some Bills action, though, let's talk about a Steelers team that, again, got above 500, got into the playoffs. It was impressive enough, but unfortunately, again, sitting here with a first-round playoff exit. So overall kind of thoughts on the Russell Wilson experiment, Dwain, because there are some chirps, in December that the Steelers were maybe looking at turning over the offense to him in the longer term. And he wasn't bad, since coming under center, 31 qualified quarterbacks, 10th in passer rating, 12th in yards per attempt, 22nd in EPA per dropback, though, 5th in completion percentage over expected. I just do wonder, man, like if there's a cap ceiling on this squad, because as we saw, especially in December, man, still not exactly a team that is scaring any sort of pass defense.
Yeah, I think it's definitely capped with Russ, but I don't think he's the reason, right, that they lost this game. I don't think he's the reason they lost the game 28-14, right? It wasn't really close. I think you just got an offense that, doesn't have other playmakers outside of George Pickens. And I think that's just a major challenge right now. So, if you could go get a quarterback that you actually think is better than Russell Wilson, do it. But that's easier said than done. Like you and I have talked about this so many times. Like really, there are only a few true difference makers, even at the quarterback position, right? You have these true aliens, and you've got 5 or 6 of them. Then you've got a group of guys that are good enough to go win with if you put the right weapons and things around them. And then you've got that other end of the extreme, which is like guys you just really don't want, under center. That if you have them there, you have no chance of winning. I think Russ is somewhere in that middle group. Like we could probably tier that group out at some point, and I don't think he'd be at the top of that group, but I think he'd be somewhere around the middle based on what we've seen. So obviously, if you could get a guy that's younger that you think is equal at least to Russ or a little bit better, I think that would be the better move. But at the same time, I think no matter who they bring in, Ian, and because you're not getting Josh Allen, you're not getting Patrick Mahomes, you're not getting some of these guys that elevate everyone else at this point, you've got to do something else with the offense. It can't just be George Pickens or bust in the pass game.
And maybe, if you do want to continue to be this, prototypical Steelers, hard-nosed, rear control line of scrimmage team, let's keep pouring some resources into the offensive line. I know they tried to do that in the draft, and they had some good early returns and some injuries happening. But, man, Dwain, when I was going through the biggest weaknesses on these teams, Steelers' offensive line actually did stick out because this season they ranked just 28th in pressure rate allowed and 25th in terms of yards before contact per carry. So if you just take those average rankings for every single team, only the Seahawks actually had a worse offensive line again in terms of that methodology. So Najee Harris, Jalen Warren, man, 8 carries for just 23 yards. I know the Ravens are a good run defense, man, but man, just having zero chance to run the football all game. I thought that was an underrated part of, the Steelers team that we did again see really rear its ugly head during the last couple weeks of the season. So you did mention George Pickens, nice little rebound, 87 yards and a touchdown, caught all 5 of his targets out there. But again, other than him, Calvin Austin, Mike Williams, Van Jefferson, haven't seen any of those guys really step up. as a legit number 2 option all season long. So, man, maybe Mike Williams could be back for year 2, but he never even reached 40 yards in a game with the Steelers. He only played 9 snaps in this one. Tough to think that, again, he's going to be a major difference maker in the year 2025. So we'll see what happens with the Steelers. Again, kudos on a not terrible season at the end of the day. Only one team gets to have all their, hopes and dreams fulfilled by the time the season concludes. But yeah, at least on Saturday wasn't the best day there. Dwain, we still have plenty of goodness to get to. First, though, a quick word to our friends over at Game Time. Dwain, we both know there's nothing like being at a game in person. And man, I'll tell you what, Fantasy Life, maybe you want to throw a couple bonuses my way. Give me to that national championship here next Monday night. I would not say no, but hey, if you guys are in the Atlanta area, really could be a fun time watching the Buckeyes just beat the living crap out of the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. So get ready for that one. And if you're going to do that, make sure you're going through Game Time, because they are certainly my go-to for finding amazing tickets, not just for sports though, also for concerts and shows too. I was actually scrolling through the Game Time app the other day, and I came across this new feature called Game Time Picks. And let me tell you what, guys, it is a total game changer. Game Time Picks curates your experience, showing you the best deals on great seats, and they make it so easy. It is truly a no-brainer, people. Seriously, Game Time takes all the guesswork out of buying tickets. You can download the Game Time app today, create an account, and use the code LIFE for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply, but again, create an account and redeem code LIFE, L-I-F-E, for $20 off. Download Game Time today, because what time is it? Game time. The Bills took down the Broncos 31-7. Dwain, Buffalo covering easily as a 7.5-point favorite. The under did cash at 48.5. So really just another brilliant postseason performance from Josh Allen. Now that's been in a long line of them. Yeah, he's had his struggles here or there, but at the end of the day, man, since the 2020 playoffs, second to only Patrick Mahomes in both passing yards and passing touchdowns, and it's not particularly close. I mean, again, Mahomes has 28 passing touchdowns in the postseason since 2020. Allen's at 23. Then we have Tom Brady at 15, which is hilarious, and then Baker Mayfield sitting there at 12. So, I thought David Hellman, former Cowboys beat reporter, now does great stuff at Fox Sports, was kind of describing, the Ravens and the Bills, and he was saying how both of their quarterbacks, really force defenses to have this, just constant struggle, because you got to worry about the pass and the run. But the difference is, Lamar Jackson kind of looks like a Maserati while he's doing it. Josh Allen's more like a, cement truck with the way he goes through a lot of these defenses. So, again, just one of the best defense in the league, and it didn't matter because the Bills have Josh Allen.
Yeah, and I mean, it's just so hard to pin down what the Bills are going to do on offense, because they've got this mantra, Ian, that everyone eats. So who do you double? Who do you try to take away? Like, it just doesn't really matter. They're just going to spread the ball around. Now, I do wonder, like, at some point, whenever they really need it, is it going to hurt that they don't have like this true elite playmaker? At least we haven't seen it. Maybe that person's there, but they just haven't had to force it yet, because they've been able to get away with just spreading it around across all these different guys. But I do think it's very impressive that Josh Allen has come out and done this season, despite the loss of Stephon Diggs from the offense. So I do think that says a lot about him, because there's not that many quarterbacks in the NFL, in my opinion, that can come out and really elevate all of these playmakers around him and get by with a wide receiver room like what the Bills have had. I thought there was some true risk of a big fall off for Josh Allen this year, or maybe not big, but a decent fall off, in the passing game for the Bills. And Josh Allen has shown that he can completely overcome that. He truly is just one of these elite quarterbacks that if you've got him on your team, no matter who the supporting cast is, you're going to have a chance every game. There's just not very many of those, but Josh Allen definitely is one of them.
Pretty much seamless, man. I mean, see the turnovers go down the way they did. He actually averaged more yards per attempt, than he had in 4 seasons. Again, without Stephon Diggs and without any sort of meaningful additions, of course, with all due respect to Curtis Samuel, who went out there and had a great game. Dwain, former Buckeye, 68 yards and a touchdown. Really nice 55-yard catch and run for Allen's second touchdown. First one, though, was just, again, a ridiculous play that really only Josh and probably a couple other quarterbacks on this planet could have made, finding Ty Johnson in the back of the end zone for a 24-yard score. So some haters out there, or maybe just realists, I should say, might think that Ty Johnson didn't quite get, full possession in the back of the end zone. It was close. Ultimately, though, they gave it to him. And it was another example, Dwain, of Ty Johnson really making the most out of his opportunities, as he's done all year long. Maybe more opportunities on his plate, too, ahead of the divisional round, with Ray Davis, unfortunately, dealing with a concussion.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, with Ray Davis leaving this game early, it was really Ty Johnson that expanded his role. You got a few extra carries for James Cook as well, as far as from like a rushing percentage standpoint. But Ty Johnson, man, he had 15 fantasy points in this game. Obviously, the catch in the back of the end zone for the touchdown was a big part of that. But he had a 5.8 utilization score, 46% of the snaps in this game, 20% of the rushing attempts. So didn't grab a lot of extra carries. Like I said, some of those went to James Cook, but still, this guy in a lot of games only gets 5% of the carries. So 20%, that's right in the range that Ray Davis has been in, 18 to 22% all season. So he did pick up some work there, but really the passing game, man, up to 50% route participation. So if we do get a game where, and hopefully this isn't the case, hopefully Ray Davis comes back from the concussion, he's good to go, but we have seen multiple players this year struggle with this sort of thing, and it's not a lock that he's going to be able to play next week. That would move Ty Johnson up the ranks. So if you're playing in a playoff format where you're drafting again this weekend, something to think about. Ty Johnson might be one of these deeper options that help you differentiate your roster if you're going to go all in on the Buffalo Bills.
Obviously, still James Cook as the RB1 in the backfield either way, and he continued to show just how much he can do with that role. $120 and a touchdown on the ground. I mean, Dwayne, just imagine, though, if James Cook, weighed in at 201 pounds instead of 199 at the combine. Like, man, we'd really be dealing with a baller then. Good reminder, guys, that especially in the year 2025 now, maybe not every single running back needs to be 230 pounds in order to command the sort of role that James Cook has been, again, making all sorts of goodness come from all season long. So otherwise, I mentioned the nice Curtis Samuel game. Khalil Shakur, 61 scoreless yards on 6 targets. Dalton Kincaid continuing to largely split time with Dawson Knox. Still not seeing a ton from Amari Cooper or Keon Coleman. So like Dwayne started with, everyone eating in this Bills offense. We'll see if they can keep the good times rolling here against the Ravens. Going to have plenty of more on that matchup again throughout the week. Quickly on the Broncos. Started off really hot. We have Bo Nix. Literally, I looked it up, Dwayne. That was the first completion to Troy Franklin, over 30 air yards all season long. They were 0 for 11 during the regular season. Franklin had some drops, Nix had some overthrows, but they connected when it mattered. So that was a cool touchdown, but sadly their only points. Sean Payton tried to give him a chance, pulled off a cool fake punt in the first half, but really no run game and just no consistent, ability to move the ball through the air either. So Cortland Sutton, 75 yards on 9 targets. And I do think at this point, Dwayne, I'm sure Marvin Mims and Troy Franklin are going to be complementary pieces, but Sutton's really the only one that we can, I think, truly feel good about continuing to have a big role in 2025 and beyond, which isn't a bad thing. The fact the Broncos made it this far is cool in the first place, but man, there's a team out there where we could use that extra high-end wide receiver to get a legit baller running back in there. It's probably this one.
Yeah, I think the guy, though, we would call out would be Mims. He's been really good down the stretch in a limited role, and he had his largest role of the season. He had a 71% route participation in this game with the Broncos' backs against the wall. Now, the way fantasy football works is you finally get to play, Ian, and you score 0.8 PPR points after scoring over 20 fantasy points on in a situation where you were getting like 40 to 45% of the routes, only playing half of the passing plays in the 2 previous weeks. So it's funny how these things end up working out, but I do think it's a positive note, right, that he does finish the year as a guy that finishes second on the team in route participation. So if we had to draft right now, today, and we're saying who is the number 2 wide receiver on the Broncos that we would want to take a swing at, I do think that is Marvin Mims. Obviously has shown the playmaking ability late in the season and got a little bit of a vote of confidence in playing time. Again, Sean Payton loves to rotate these guys, so no guarantee that this is some sort of signal that he's suddenly going to be locked in as the wide receiver 2, getting all this playing time. But I think it at least opens the door. So Marvin Mims, whatever it is you've got to go do this offseason to work on your game, to gain that trust of Sean Payton so you can be out there more. We've seen you can make the plays. Just go get it done so we can have fantasy goodness next year.
Telling you, Dwayne, call my shot now. 2 months from now, around the combine, Sean Payton can go out there and talk about that Joker role and how he thinks Marvin can be filling that again ahead of next season. ADP is going to skyrocket, but maybe deservedly so. Again, guy really did have a great final month or so to the season. But otherwise, again, just shout out to Cortland Sutton, 1,081 yards and 8 touchdowns in the regular season. He was the wide receiver 12 in PPR points per game from week 8 through the wild card round. So 50% of the team's area yards share, Dwain. That was the highest mark in the NFL. Again, someone that we've just seen be the Broncos' clear number one wide receiver now for quite some time. Finally, really putting forward that production that you would expect to come with that. So good stuff from Sutton and Bo Nix. And again, what was otherwise a good season, relative to expectations. So guys, still got two more matchups to break down though. First, a quick word from our friends over at Bud Light.
Even if you score, always stay hungry. No matter how hard you football, it's easy to Sunday.
Eagles took down the Packers 22-10. Philly did cover as 5.5-point faves. The under cashed here at 46. So we'll get into Jordan Love and the Packers offensive struggles in a second. But also, Dwayne, despite the win, which you'll take 8 days of the week if you're, an Eagles fan, wasn't exactly the most encouraging performance from this Eagles passing attack. Jalen Hurts averaged 3 yards per pass attempt in the first half. Found Jahan Dotson for a touchdown in almost a comically clean pocket with no pass rusher within about 10 yards of him, and then did get a second passing touchdown in the second half. That said, way more of just a brilliant individual effort from Dallas Goedert, throwing 3 or 4 stiff arms, looking like King Henry out there on his way to the end zone. So again, not exactly the most surprising thing. We've seen the Eagles be able to win games just leaning on their run game and Saquon Barkley, but we had the long missed touchdown to A.J. Brown on a pretty cool design fake tush push. Again, just a game where if you are a Jalen Hurts hater, this is the sort of film you can probably point out to make that point.
Yeah, I mean, if I'm an Eagles fan, I don't feel that great. Like, you win the game. It's a convincing win from a standpoint of just looking at the scoreboard. But this was way closer than what it should have been, Ian. With the way that they were gifted these turnovers and everything, like the Eagles should have put up 40 points. Like, this is a team they should have just absolutely blown out. Yes, they won with ease, but it should have been a blowout. I hate to be nitpicky, but the problem here is that we've seen a trend from Jalen Hurts down the stretch. Not sure what the exact culprit of this is, but man, this passing game's been pretty atrocious. If we look at the last 5 games, Jalen Hurts 179 yards and a touchdown, 118 yards and a touchdown, 108 yards and 2 touchdowns, 290 yards and 2 touchdowns. So we had a little bit of a spark. Then you had the injury game, so let's exclude those. But then 131 yards and 2 touchdowns this weekend. So look, you're getting the 2 touchdowns and that's great. But man, you're eventually going to have to throw the ball in the playoffs to be able to win a game. And this is really problematic. Now, they've got a good defense. They've got a really good run game. So the Eagles have a lot of great things going. But honestly, like, Jalen Hurts is playing the worst football, like, of his career, going back to, like, his rookie season, in my opinion. Whenever he ended that 1 year and he had the 4 games and he kind of looked lost, but we were getting fantasy points out of it because he was running around doing his thing. But nobody felt super confident, in Jalen Hurts as a quarterback. That's kind of where I'm at with him right now. Not saying he can't flip the switch and get it going again, because we have seen Jalen Hurts be a successful passer in the past. But you do wonder, like, has the league figured this out? Because he's got 3 really good pass catchers, man. To go out here with A.J. Brown, Devonta Smith, and Dallas Goedert and only be able to put up 131-2 against a super banged up Packers team where you just got all these turnovers, it's troubling to me.
And you especially worry about, that inevitable, I think we can say, NFC Championship potential matchup against the Lions, where maybe the Eagles aren't able to play with the lead, and all of a sudden they are in more, obvious pass-first situations. It's going to be that much tougher for Hurts and this group to get by there. So obviously Hurts does help with that ever-lethal run game. He chipped in 36 yards out there. But again, it's one of those weird things, Dwayne. I was saying it earlier in this season, and especially last year, about how much slower Hurts just kind of looked on film relative to earlier in his career. And he kind of had it fixed, it seemed like, halfway through this year. But then he's out there once again making guys miss and then seemingly getting chased down by angles that, again, just surprised to see linebackers and safeties be able to get on the dude in the first place. So as always, I do wonder if he's a bit more banged up than we know just by looking at injury reports and things like that. But yeah, not exactly, flying as high as we would like to see ahead of the divisional round. Got to give some credit, though, to Saquon Barkley, 119 yards rushing out there. Also caught 2 passes. Coulda, shoulda, woulda. Dwayne had a house call of 76 yards there at the end, but Saquon had to go ahead and ice the game for his real-life team instead of cashing that, anytime touchdown bet for all the faithful bettors out there. So I kid. He did what he was supposed to do. But yeah, Saquon Barkley still really freaking good at football. Who would have thought? Only other note, I guess, would be A.J. Brown reading Inner Excellence on the sideline, Dwayne. Are you a fan of that novel?
Yeah, when you're out there for 100% of the plays and you barely get targeted, I think you've got, if you're a stud wide receiver, I feel like this is the move. You've got to go over and find that inner peace, Ian, that inner excellence to not completely explode on the sideline. Probably reading some sort of a quote of like basically, saying, hey, you got to look at the bigger picture, right? You're getting a playoff win here, so let's not freak out about not getting the targets. Obviously, to your point, a really cool design fake tush push that probably would have made him feel a lot better because he was past the defense. Better ball from Jalen Hurts. That is a house call for A.J. Brown. So we'll see what happens here. I think the big takeaway from the Eagles passing game this weekend, Ian, is just really Dallas Goedert, man. He led the way with a 35% target share, 80% route participation. So he gave you 14.7 PPR points. He is a guy that we talked about if you wanted to get a little bit more contrarian with your Eagles builds and any of these fantasy playoff contests. The Goedert was a name to think of. Like we know he's a good player, not an elite player like A.J. Brown, but if you get against better defenses that decide that they really want to focus on taking the wide receivers away, Goedert is a guy in the past that we have seen come through as a fantasy tight end, and he did so in this game.
Eagles going to be taking on the winner of this Rams-Vikings Monday night game that we have going on. I'm sure they will be, a slight favorite, but again, going to need a better effort out of their offense.
They want the Rams,
to feel
man.
Truly good about that. Yeah.
They don't want the Vikings. The Vikings have one of the best run defenses in the league. That's going to scare the Eagles. They would much rather face the Rams.
Finish things off, just going through again a disappointing Packers performance because as bad as things were going for them, I mean, going into halftime still was, a short 10-point, maybe even 7-point lead out there. So Jordan Love certainly didn't help his own matters, certainly getting a lot of slander over in the social media world, and for good reason. He did throw 3 interceptions, and the first 2 were definitely on him. And the third one, I mean, it was a bomb into double coverage, probably could have been DPI, was also with 2 minutes left in the game, so just kind of had to force things at that point. So interesting stat though, Dwain, from Brett Coleman, obviously does awesome stuff over in those YouTube streets. Looking at true dropbacks this season, no RPOs, no play action, no screens. Jordan Love, man, just 26th in completion rate, 7.5 yards per attempt, 27th in passer rating with a 15-15 touchdown to interception ratio. So do you think some of those numbers are including the no plays? You get in the PFF weed and you got to sort through some stuff like that. But yeah, man, I thought it was a good season from Jordan Love, albeit, we did continue to see some of the inconsistencies rear, their head. It wasn't like he just took that second half of 2023 and kept it going each and every week throughout this season.
Yeah, and another team where we start to wonder, like, do they need to still upgrade the wide receiver core? It's kind of it's built on kind of a similar mantra to what we've had with the Bills this year, as everyone is going to eat, but that just hasn't worked out for them. I don't know. I feel like figuring out more ways to get the ball to Jaden Reed and maybe simplifying the offense a little bit. But I'll say this, like, yesterday was tough. Like, you just have pressure right in your face right away a lot of the game. When you look at the Packers, could anyone be more injured? Like, if we're going with a Chandler being referenced back to friends, like, I mean, that was massive. All the offensive line injuries, losing, you come into the game already without Christian Watson, then you lose Romeo Doubs from the game, Jaden Reed getting banged up late. Dontavian Wicks, all I can say is, man, you had your chance. You had your chance multiple times this year, and you did not come through, making me look like an absolute fool. What are you doing out here? So I will say this, though, with Jordan Love. Watching him on film this year, I get it, and where Brett Coleman's going with all those data points. The one thing I feel like we still see is he can try to buy time. Yesterday it was so tough because the pressure was right up the middle. When he would sidestep that, there's immediately another defender there to take him down. But look, man, I lived the nightmare last year watching that playoff game against the Cowboys. Basically all 22 film the whole time. He still has a lot of that in him. I see it. He can just buy that extra time, keeps his eyes downfield. So I feel like the Packers probably got to think about an upgrade, to the wide receiver core. We have some solid players, but maybe we need something better than that to help get them over the top.
Obviously doesn't help when all those players are just pretty much injured, with the exception of Dontavian Wicks, Dobbs with a concussion, Reed with a shoulder injury. Obviously, Christian Watson's season already cut short. But yeah, nobody has fewer $20, $25 devoted to their wide receiver room ahead of next season. Packers continue to lean on that, youngest team in the NFL moniker. Maybe let's do something to start fixing that and getting some higher end pass game options there for Jordan Love. So you can look at that big contract and say they shouldn't have done it. But again, look at more stats than not. No, Jordan Love DEN-BUF is not in there with the top 5, top 6 guys right now, but still think you're going to be hard pressed to find more than 9 or 10 quarterbacks you would rather have leading your team into the future. So otherwise, shout out Josh Jacobs, 81 yards and a touchdown on the ground, also 40 yards receiving. Beast mode-esque 31-yard run to get down to the 1-yard line. Really was a great season for him. Maybe not ripping off the 70-yard house calls like Saquon or Derrick Henry, but did, I believe, lead the NFL in total missed tackles forced. Really was a problem for defenses to deal with for the entire second half of the year. So good stuff from Mr. Jacobs. But Dwain takes us to our last game we want to break down, and that was the Commanders' exhilarating 23-20 victory over the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Shout out to, our fearless leader over here at Fantasy Life, Matthew Berry, for his Commanders getting their first playoff win since 2005. So under still cash wasn't exactly the shootout we were maybe hoping for, but just another clean performance from Jaden Daniels, Dwain. It's getting ridiculous how many games these guys can have where nothing bad really happens. I mean, I saw a crazy stat just this morning. I believe Jaden Daniels now already has 3 games where the Commanders have not had a turnover and they have not had a punt. Like, that's more than Peyton, Brady, and Mahomes have had in their careers at this point, man. So as much as you want to look at Daniels and say, he'll get figured out eventually, this or that. I mean, the dude's got a cannon. They saw it on the first drive of the game. He hit Terry McLaurin deep down the sideline, so he stretches you vertically. And then you can't tackle the guy because he's also one of the fastest players on the field. We're going to see what he has, for the Lions next week. But the Commanders, man, looking like a live dog.
Yeah, I think if I'm the Lions, Baker played well as also on the other side. We'll get to the Bucs here in a minute, but if I'm having to choose between these two, I would rather play against the Bucs just because of all the things that Jaden Daniels can do. We've already talked about it earlier in the show with Lamar Jackson. We've talked about Josh Allen. He does a lot of the same things, Ian, and even though he's a rookie, I know that it's kind of this was the narrative last night on the broadcast, but it was true. He's just not phased. He does not look like a rookie. Now, I don't believe it's because he played all these extra games in college, and I don't buy into that narrative. This guy has natural ability. Yeah, he played the extra games and stuff. He's just a really good football player. You can come out and do this, even if you only played 2 seasons. You don't need 3 or 4 to be able to look like this. You have to just be a special player. And that's what Jaden Daniels is. Just never looks like he's, at any sort of situation where he's panicking, man. It's so cool, having to pick up multiple situations where it's like plays that you got to have and he gets them. It's just, and I get it. Like the Commanders going out here and going for it 4 times on 4th down. But they get 2 touchdowns rather than, 4 field goals. So you add all that up, you're still better off getting the touchdowns. So I liked the mantra from, the head coaching staff from Quinn of basically saying, look, if we're going to do it, we're just going to keep the pedal to the metal. We're going to do it every time. And that's how you ultimately make the odds work out for you over the long term. But the only thing that allows you to do that is you've got Jaden Daniels. It's tough to make those sort of decisions when you don't have a quarterback like him that can just put the defense in a bind no matter what, Ian. But 268 yards, 2 touchdowns through the air, and 36 rushing yards yesterday. The big thing is, man, over these last couple of games, man, the last 4 games, he's accounted for 27% of the team's rushing attempts. So as the Commanders have come into to crunch time, he's absolutely getting a bunch of the design run attempts. And that doesn't include the scrambles, man. 12% scramble rate, way above the NFL average of 6%. If you look at him over these last 4 games, averaging 10.5 rushing attempts total per game. That is amazing stuff for fantasy.
And talk about just overachieving this season and what the future couldn't be more bright at this point. Only the Patriots and Raiders have more effective cap space than the Commanders ahead of this next offseason. So, hey, one not done. We'll see what they can go and pull off in this playoff stretch. But again, when I look at this backfield, which Austin Eckler, a huge play at the end, obviously, picking up that chunk gain as a receiver. He's been good when healthy this year. Brian Robinson has had, some better games recently. He's been, a bit down. Last 15 carries have only produced 26 yards. But again, God forbid we add, a true game changer at running back and a few more receivers here, really could be even bigger and better things in 2025. So did want to shout out some of these receivers still making plays. Diami Brown, arguably his best game of his career, 89 yards and a touchdown, caught all 5 of his targets. And of course, Terry McLaurin doing big things as well. 89 yards and a touchdown, caught 7 of his 10 targets. So this season now, Dwain, NFL best 70% contested catch rate on contested targets, and his passer rating when targeted only trails Jaden Reed. So I know, everyone, the week 70 performance was annoying, but really good stuff from the artist known as Scary Terry over these past 2 weeks.
Yeah, man. PPR points of 20.2 and 21.9 over the last 2 weeks. Obviously, in crunch time down the stretch. Yes, the week 17 was annoying, but Terry has really been good the second half of the season. If we look at him in these last 2 games, utilization score of a 9.5 in each one, Ian, target shares of 40% and 32%. So really, it's just entered this alpha territory. Yeah, they have the other guys they're working through. We've got Olamide Zaccheaus. You've also got Diami Brown, but it's hard to predict like which one of those guys is going to do anything week to week, but we know that Terry McLaurin is the one guy they really are trying to get the ball to. And man, he and Jaden Daniels seem to be in complete sync. So great to see. If you've been a Terry McLaurin fan, if you guys ever watched Terry McLaurin, you always knew he was really good at football and that the quarterback was a big part of the issue. So great to see him finally get to play with a quarterback like Jaden Daniels. You love to see it.
Love to see it. Unfortunately, don't love to see, again, the Buccaneers with this early playoff exit. You mentioned before, Baker Mayfield really didn't go out there and lose them the game by any stretch of the imagination. 185 yards and 2 touchdowns through the air on just 15 of 18 passing. Also chipped in 23 rushing yards. I'm guessing he's going to win Kyle Brandt's angry run of the week. Really fun stuff out there. Even had Chris Godwin, tweeting out the gif of T.O. saying, that's my quarterback after that big play. So good stuff there. Just unfortunately, man, fourth quarter fumble on a jet sweep exchange to Jalen McMillan. And they had a weird bad snap situation on a 3rd and 1 at the end that forced them to settle for a field goal, and they never touched the ball again. So bit of a, Jameis experience to Baker. You can even argue more of like a Brett Favre type of thing, Dwain. Not that he's reached those MVP heights of Favre, but again, the man, Baker Mayfield, leads the NFL in passing touchdowns with 77 since week 1 of last season. Also leads the NFL in interceptions during that same stretch. So certainly has proved, he is a worthy franchise quarterback to build around. We'll see what 2025 has. Still a good season, albeit, again, just couldn't quite get it done yesterday.
Yeah, tough morning for Bucs players and fans, obviously. Like, this is a game that they really could have won as well. All the things we talked about with Jaden Daniels and how well the Commanders played, the Bucs played equally as well. They just made a couple of key mistakes that you mentioned that cost them the game. I think the big takeaway here, Ian, is thinking about next year, Bucky Irving. Are folks going to continue to twist themselves around the axle of a guy is too small? We've done it with Kyron Williams. We've done it with Jahmyr Gibbs. We've done it in the past with Austin Eckler. We did it last year with Devon Achane. We just need to move forward, guys. You got to get this stuff. Don't let that keep you away from a player like Bucky Irving. Obviously, we'll see what they do in the offseason. Like you said, Ian, they go out and they spend a round 2 draft pick on a running back. That'll change our view a little bit for Bucky Irving, but the guy has been amazing. And over these last 2 games, 69% of the snaps, 65% of the rushing attempts, 45% route participation, 13% target share, has ultimately just relegated Rachaad White to really just 3rd down and long in the 2-minute offense. So just a passing down back. And the thing is, we know that Bucky Irving can actually handle that role as well. Saw him picking up some blitzes yesterday. So this is a guy, man, that's just absolutely looked phenomenal. I think he's in the same conversation as these other part-time backs that are absolutely electric, but he could have a full-time role next year. But you just know people are going to come out and argue that he can't do it because he doesn't weigh 200 pounds. And I just think we've got to move forward from that line of thinking.
Most yards after contact per carry this season, Dwain, of any running back not named Derrick Henry or Nick Chubb over the past 10 years. I mean, cannot say enough good things about what Bucky has pulled off. Final shout out to Mike Evans, caught all 7 of his targets for 92 yards and a touchdown. Really have Marshawn Lattimore in a blender all evening long. No fighting, fortunately or unfortunately, however you feel about that sort of thing. But guys, that's going to wrap up this edition of the Fantasy Life Show. We'll be back throughout the week, though, of much more playoff preview goodness. And yeah, just generally talking ball and having a good time. So for Dwain, for producer Matt, for producer Kelsey, I'm Ian. Thanks again for tuning into the Fantasy Life Show. And until next time, take care, everybody.